This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode contains subject matter that some listeners might find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. The telephone tower really stands out. The red and white steel mast reaches over 200 yards into the air. Aside from the tower, no building in this part of Delphi is more than 2 stories high. It's a quiet area with big lawns, wide roads, and houses spaced far apart. A few streets away, the small town fades away, and seemingly endless fields of corn and soybeans stretch as far as the eye can see. In the opposite direction, you can either drive into central Delphi or follow the road north. It only takes a few minutes to drive from here to the hiking trails at Monon High Bridge. On Whiteman Drive, it's an ordinary, quiet Thursdays. A few cars are heading downtown, but otherwise, there's not much activity. It's the 13th of October, and with the autumn approaching, many of the lawns on the street are starting to lose their green luster. A police car is parked outside a small house made of light brick and white wood. Around the house, there's a few well-trimmed bushes, and on one side of the lawn, a row of tall trees. Soon, more police cars arrive and park next to the property. Car doors open, and then, in an instant, the calm on Whiteman Drive disappears. The police enter the house. The owner is already sitting in one of the cars outside, accompanied by a couple of officers. Inside the small house, the police find, among other things, a pistol, which they place in an evidence bag. They also find a bullet, which is placed in a similar bag. Both the gun and the bullet are .40 caliber. Then, they discover several different knives. Outside, in the car where the house's owner is sitting, one of the officers suddenly remembers something.
Lieutenant Jerry Holman is sitting in a car in Richard Allen's driveway while they're doing a search inside. And he goes, "Hey, if we tear up your house, tear up your drywall, we'll fill out a form. Don't worry, we'll repair your house." He says, Richard Allen says to him, "Why bother? It's all over."
This is the story of 2 young girls, of an idyllic, free, and safe place in the American heartland where something horrific happens. It's a crime that shakes an entire town and changes it forever. And how this tragedy is still ongoing even today. You're listening to The Delphi Murders, a 4-part documentary about the hunt for the man on the bridge. This is the 4th and final chapter. For now, the case against Richard Allen.
Today is not a day to celebrate, but the arrest of Richard M. Allen of Delphi on 2 counts of murder is sure a major step in leading to the conclusion of this long-term and complex investigation.
That's Superintendent Doug Carter from the Indiana State Police, delivering this news in October of 2022. With a trembling voice, he announces that a man has been arrested for the murders of Libby and Abby, a man named Richard Allen. But who is he?
He's a man in his early 50s. He was married with 1 grown child. He worked at a local CVS in Delphi. He was a pharmacy technician.
This is Brian Whitney. He has been following this case for several years and has written a book about it. Now he shares some details about Richard Allen.
He's lived in Delphi since 2007. He bought a home in 2007 in Delphi. Can't remember where he's from originally, but he's an Indiana guy. I mean, he's not like from away. He's just like lives from some like neighboring town in Indiana.
So pretty much an ordinary guy who moved to town many years ago. His neighbors only have good things to say about him. And he works at CVS, one of the largest pharmacy franchises in the U.S. So even though not everyone knows him personally, most people in Delphi are familiar with who he is.
I had not interacted with him, but everyone knew who he was. I mean, he worked there for so long. And when I found out who it was, I never in a million years thought that it would have been him. Not someone so integral to the community and to the Delphi experience.
Yes, that's how Delphi resident Cynth Rossi reacts to Allen's arrest. She's the same age as Abby and Libby and was close friends with both victims growing up. In addition to picking up medicine, you can go to CVS to buy office supplies, small household items, or print out documents. Now it turns out that when Libby's family is printing pictures for the funeral, it's Richard Allen who helps them with the photos. Here you can hear Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother, when a reporter from Channel 13 asks her about this.
Can I just ask you one question? Maybe you can put a rumor to rest or something. There's a report going around right now that this Mr. Allen actually processed some photos for the family at the CVS. Do you know if that's accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay, and that he didn't charge the family when they came in to claim the photos?
That is correct.
Okay, and you know that firsthand.
Becky Patty, the grandmother, said that when they had the girls' funeral photos printed, that Allen didn't charge them for the photos. Allen actually printed the photos and was like, oh yeah, no, you don't have to pay me for those. After he, in theory, had slaughtered her grandchildren, he's handing her photos of them for the funeral.
Since Allen printed those photos for the funeral, 5 years have passed. During those years, the entire town of Delphi had wondered who was responsible for the horrific double murder. Now it seems that this Richard Allen is the one they've been looking for. But how did the police finally zero in on Richard Allen after all these years? It starts with a mistake in the filing. One day in September of 2022, police assistant Kathy Shank is going through old case materials, and then she notices something. Fox reporter Russ McQuaid reports.
In September of 2022, she's going through the files. She pulls one out and goes, hey, this doesn't look right. It's a file of an interview done in 2017 with a man identified as Rick Allen Whiteman. His name's Richard Allen, but he lives on Whiteman Drive. It's misfiled. She looks at it. She goes, hey, this guy admits he was on the bridge that day walking on the trail. She takes it to Liggett, Tony Liggett. He was the chief investigator back then, says, you need to look at this.
Yes, police assistant Kathy Shank finds Allen's old testimony. His name had been filed incorrectly. Someone had written it as Rick Allen Whiteman, which isn't his name. It's Richard Allen. However, he does live on Whiteman Drive. So we guess this is where someone made a mistake. We don't know why no one had looked into this testimony until Kathy Shank discovered it in the fall of 2022. But now that they go through it, a lot starts to fall into place. Allen is, in fact, out in the woods at Monon High Bridge that unusually warm day in February. And he had called the police himself in case they needed to speak to him about what he had seen or where he had been.
And Richard Allen self-reported, called up and said, I want to talk to a law enforcement officer. Hey, I was on the bridge that day. Ask me any question. Maybe people saw me up there. Here I am. This is how you find me.
On February 18th, 2017, 4 days after Libby and Abby are found in the woods, authorities follow up on Allen's phone call and take his statement. According to Allen, he was at Monon High Bridge on February 13, 2017, to look at the fish in the river. He had driven there and parked near an old house by the highway. He then walked from Freedom Bridge into the woods. In his testimony from 2017, Allen states that he was on the bridge the same day as the girls. He also mentions wearing a pair of jeans and a jacket, which he describes as either dark blue or black.
He lives right near the scene of the crime. He looks like Bridge Guy. He dresses like Bridge Guy. In fact, his wife, after I already mentioned this, but after he got coached, she's like, "Oh yeah, he's got a flu coat like just like that." And he even told police he was there that day.
As you probably remember, Libby and Abby arrive at Monon High Bridge around 1:40 p.m. Libby's Snapchat photo is posted at 2:07 p.m. The police have long assumed that they are taken from the bridge shortly after the photo is taken. This timeline fits very well with the time Allen is reportedly in the woods.
He basically said that he was on the trails that day between 1:30 and 3:30.
You may also remember that a 16-year-old girl who had been near Freedom Bridge with her friends saw a man she believed could be the bridge man. Richard Allen also says that he saw a group of young girls near Freedom Bridge, so it's possible that the man the young woman saw was Richard Allen. Then there's Allen's car. In 2019, the police publicly appealed for tips about a vehicle seen near the hiking trails.
He said he arrived in the trails driving his personal vehicle, told the police he parked his car, what he referred to as the old Farm Bureau building.
He says that he parked near the Farm Bureau building, while the police had been looking for a car near the Department of Child Services. So there are some discrepancies, but there's also a lot that's fitting in with what they've been looking for. And then there's the physical aspect. When you look at the image of the bridge man from Libby's phone, it's not hard to imagine that the person in the photo could be Richard Allen.
He's the same height, he's the same build.
He has the physique, the height matches, and what little that can be made out of the bridge man's face resembles Allen. But as we've said before, it's a pixelated image, so it's impossible to be absolutely sure. But then there's the composite sketch, the first one, of a broad-shouldered, middle-aged man. That image also bears a strong resemblance to Richard Allen.
But when we see the mugshot of Richard Allen, he looks mostly like that initial sketch.
But it becomes a bit more tricky when you look at the second composite sketch, because it doesn't look much like Allen. And that's the one the police have said is the most reliable. Reporter Mark Mullins from WRTV asks State Police Chief Doug Carter what we should make of this.
So why the change 2 years into someone that didn't look anything like the person that we were presented with on Monday?
Well, I'll answer the question in two parts. One, isn't that amazing? That he looks a lot like one and a little bit like the other, depending upon the eye of the beholder, right?
Not exactly a crystal clear answer. But then, there's one more thing that no one outside the investigation has known until now. As you're aware, unclear information has been a running theme with this case, which has sometimes frustrated people and raised questions about police incompetence and whether they're really doing everything they can. But now, when Allen is arrested in late October of 2022, the police start to put a few more cards on the table.
Law enforcement knew three things that we didn't know, that the victim's family didn't even know.
The police have deliberately withheld information. This isn't an uncommon tactic in murder investigations. They want certain details to be unknown to everyone except the killer. The hope is that the killer will slip up or reveal something in another way. And that's exactly what has happened now in Delphi.
Like, they knew that there was a gun used. Even if it wasn't used to kill, there was a gun because they found this bullet on the ground. They knew the bullet was found, racked, and left at the scene next to one of the victims.
So, the police found a bullet very early in the investigation. It was only a few feet from the murdered girls. This .40 caliber bullet has not been fired, but was likely ejected from the side of a handgun. The thing is, even when bullets are ejected from the side of a gun, there are distinct markings. These markings can be completely unique. No two handguns leave the exact same marks. Not even two guns of the same make and model. At Richard Allen's home, they find a handgun of the same caliber that leaves the exact same markings when bullets are racked.
During that warrant, when they served that warrant, they found the gun in Richard Allen's nightstand that they say is connected to the bullet that was found at the crime scene, the bullet found in between the girls' two bodies. They also found a blue Carhartt jacket, very similar to the jacket seemingly worn in that bridge guy photo.
Like, if this guy has his gun and he used his gun and he didn't use the gun to kill them, and he doesn't know that the bullet was recycled through there and was laying on the ground. He doesn't think there's any reason to get rid of his gun, because again, he didn't shoot them with the gun.
All these years, the police have been working under the assumption that the killer might not even remember ejecting a bullet. And since the pistol wasn't the murder weapon, they hoped that the killer hadn't gotten rid of it. Now it seems like their, what should we call it, high-risk gamble is paying off. Because Richard Allen even tells the police that he has never lent his pistol to anyone. And that's a good start if you want to link him to the pistol, and the pistol to the crime scene. The police theory is that the perpetrator threatened the girls with a gun on the bridge or somewhere nearby. That's how he gained control of them, and then led them down the hill, as we hear in the clip from Libby's phone. The murder weapon is a knife. More specifically, they believe it was a box cutter, the type of knife used for opening packages.
Box cutters are really common things at stores like CVS's. It's these guys probably all had their own box cutters. I mean, it's like they're getting, everything that they're getting that they need to open is coming in a box.
At Allen's home, several knives are seized by the police. And as Brian Whitney just mentioned, there are plenty of box cutters at his workplace. A few days after the police search Allen's home, the county prosecutor, Nick McLeland, files charges against him.
Mr. Allen has had his initial hearing. He's entered a preliminary plea of not guilty. The matter's been set for a pretrial on January 13th at 9 a.m., 2023, and a trial date of March 20th, 2023 at 9 a.m. He is presumed innocent. We will have an opportunity and day in court when we can present the evidence that we have against him. But until that day, he is presumed innocent.
When Richard Allen is arrested, he's taken to Carroll County Jail, where Delphi is located. He's denied bail and must remain there until his trial begins. This creates problems for the police. The Carroll County Jail is similar to one you might have seen in television police dramas. It's one large room where several detainees are held together. Most people stay only a day or two, but that's not the case for Richard Allen. It could take a long time before his case goes to trial, which means the jail simply isn't suitable. He is entitled to some privacy, even behind bars, and needs the ability to speak privately with his defense. But more importantly, it could be outright dangerous for Allen to stay there.
The suspect arrested for the murders of 2 Indiana teens is now in a state prison. 50-year-old Richard Allen was moved from the Carroll County Jail to an undisclosed Indiana Department of Corrections facility. The sheriff says the move was necessary because Allen's safety was at risk because of the high-profile case.
This is a case that stirs strong emotions in the area. People are genuinely afraid that someone might take justice into their own hands and attack Allen while he's in custody. It wouldn't be impossible if someone actually decided to do so. All it takes is for them to be arrested for a crime, and they end up in the same jail. For this reason, Allen is placed in a maximum security prison. The idea is to keep him safe, out of reach from any vengeful local residents. But according to Allen's defense attorney, he has ended up in a place that might be a bit too secure.
Allen's attorney, Bradley Rosie, says Allen has been housed since November in a maximum security segregated unit where the most dangerous offenders are held. The motion compares his cell to a dog kennel, with infrequent showers and dirty clothes, being treated like a prisoner of war.
So he hasn't even been convicted, but he's living like he has been not only convicted, but he's been convicted of the worst crime in the world.
Not only is Richard Allen placed in one of the state's most high security prisons, but as you can hear, he lives a very restricted, isolated life in many ways. Despite the fact that he has not yet been convicted of anything. And this is largely due to the fact that prison can be a very dangerous place if you're in for a crime against children.
Crimes against children are often greeted with violence by other prisoners. Like when I used to work in the prison system, I knew a guy that had crimes against children, not even violent crimes, but crimes against children. He changed his paperwork to say he was in there for murder so people would leave him alone. Richard Allen would probably be like, at a minimum, he'd be beaten every time he was like in general population, and maximum he'd be killed.
So, Richard Allen sits in an isolated wing of a high-security prison. The plan is for him to remain there until his trial begins, then be transferred closer to the courthouse. Since the trial is set to start in early 2023, it's now October 2022. It's not too long to wait. However, it will take longer than expected, and this delay is partly due to Allen's own attorneys. Richard Allen is assigned to 2 public defenders, Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rosie. Naturally, they have access to much of the police material. Without it, they can't properly defend their client. But this material cannot be shared with anyone outside the defense team. This is standard practice. But in this case, the judge has even issued a gag order, meaning that everyone involved, defense, prosecution, police, family members, witnesses, anyone who will testify, are prohibited from speaking about the case to outsiders. But in October of 2023, parts of the investigation leak. Photos from the crime scene are sent to various media personalities, and the leak comes from Allen's defense. Not from the attorneys themselves, Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rosie, but from an acquaintance of theirs.
He went by to Allen Baldwin's office and found all these photos, crime scene photos of the girls' bodies just laying on a conference table. So this guy, being the nice guy that he is, took photos of this stuff, sent it to another guy, who then sent it to another guy, and then they started sending it out to different podcasters and media outlets, and so this obviously caused the judge to be quite upset.
As Brian mentions, the judge, Frances Gull, is understandably upset. She even goes as far as to have a private conversation with the defense team, expressing her frustration over how they've handled the evidence. After this conversation, things get quite messy.
That they had voluntarily withdrawn. The 2 attorneys, Baldwin and Rosie, pushed back, saying they did not voluntarily withdraw. They were forced off the case. She eventually put them back on the case, which I think she only did because if she didn't, the chances for like a huge delay or a mistrial are enormous.
Judge Gull initially suggests that the defense lawyers step aside voluntarily. However, the defense denies this, and after an appeal to the Indiana Supreme Court, they return to represent Allen. It's safe to say things get messy. But besides the leak and the conflict between the judge and the defense team, there's another reason the trial is delayed longer than expected. This has to do with the strategy Baldwin and Rozzi are using. In many murder cases, the defense's job is to either point to another possible perpetrator or to create doubt in the jury's mind, so they can't be sure the accused is guilty. If there's any reasonable doubt, the jury must acquit. So, the defense begins their campaign to convince everyone that Allen is innocent, even before the trial begins, despite the gag order. In late 2023, they claim that the horrific double murder was carried out by a pagan cult with ties to white supremacist movements. Here's what that sounded like on the local channel WTHR.
Good morning, Julia. And Julia, in these new documents, Allen's defense team says they have new information that people practicing the pagan religion of Odinism were behind the killings of Abby Williams and Libby German and not their client, Allen.
The attorneys Baldwin and Rozzi said members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritually scarified the girls. I found a source that basically says Odinists worship ancient Norse gods. They typically wear pendants of Thor's hammer around their neck and meet for rituals in the woods where they drink mead from a communal horn, read ancient poetry, and occasionally slaughter animals in sacrifice to the gods.
Apparently, the girls' bodies were covered with twigs and branches after the murders. The defense is now trying to convince anyone who will listen that these branches were placed in a way that is typical of this pagan cult, which worships the Norse god Odin. They even go as far as to claim that Allen was coerced into making false confessions by prison guards who are also allegedly connected to this cult.
Why is this significant? Because the defense is also alleging that the crime scene itself had evidence of an Odinistic, ritualistic sacrifice, murder. And the Odinist guards are making him confess to protect the Odinist murderers.
It is certainly remarkable. However, there seems to be no evidence beyond the defense's statements that links the murder to such a cult. No witnesses, no other potential suspects, and no forensic evidence to connect the crime to Odin, Thor, or any pagan rituals.
So the prosecutor, McClelland, called it, quote, a fanciful defense for social media to devour that isn't supported by evidence. A detective, Purdy, said there was no evidence connecting Odinism to the murders. And Judge Gull issued an order in September of this year saying they hadn't shown any admissible evidence that showed any real links, so she's not going to allow it.
So, Judge Francis Gull outright forbids the defense from discussing Odinists at trial, since no evidence has been found to support this theory. It cannot be mentioned at all. The defense is also banned from naming any other potential perpetrators. They can only attempt to prove Allen's innocence or raise enough doubt about his guilt to prevent the jury from convicting him. It's worth noting that the defense has objections to this ban, but for now, this is the situation. Perhaps the intention behind bringing up the Odin worshippers was to sow doubt amongst the jurors, to get them questioning whether someone else could be responsible. But if that's the case, there are certainly other, more plausible individuals they could point to, like Ron Logan, who lied about his alibi and lives near the crime scene, Or Keegan Klein, who had arranged a meeting with Libby through his catfishing account, Anthony Schatz, later that day.
I don't understand why they wouldn't either pin it on somebody like Logan or Klein or just even come up with like some random, there has to be some psychopath that like went through Indiana in like that time period.
The trial of Richard Allen begins in October of 2024. As we produce this series in November of 2024, it's still ongoing. Every day, prosecutors, defense attorneys, the jury, family members, and curious journalists gather in the old courthouse in downtown Delphi. And every day, new information comes to light. But we don't have as much access to this information as we do in some other cases. Here, Channel 13 reporter Bob Siegel explains why.
So this trial that's going to be taking place here at the Carroll County Courthouse, it is a big deal here in Delphi, as you can imagine. It's a big deal across Indiana, really all over the nation. And that's why 13 News and other media have repeatedly asked to have a camera inside the courtroom for the trial. But all of our requests have been denied.
No cameras or audio recordings are allowed in the courtroom. However, the court is open to the public in Delphi and to all journalists who manage to find a seat, as long as they don't record anything. That's why you won't hear witnesses, attorneys, or Richard Allen in their own voices. Instead, journalists run in and out of the courtroom reporting what happens. As we now know, police have been intentionally vague about certain details. This is how they were finally able to track down the pistol, which they claim links Allen to the crime scene. But there are still things we don't know for sure. For example, there have been reports of witnesses who say they saw a man resembling the sketch of the bridge guy on February 13th. These witnesses describe seeing a man with muddy and bloody clothes.
So the police said at that point they interviewed 3 juveniles who said they saw a man walking from the Freedom Bridge to the Mononai Bridge. They gave a description that was kind of correlated with bridge guy, and they said he was wearing a blue jacket and blue jeans and he was muddy and bloody, and this was just before 4 p.m.
If this is true, and it turns out it is Richard Allen that these witnesses saw, it could potentially be a decisive piece of evidence. Perhaps the police have kept this secret on purpose, just like they did with the bullet, in order to prevent the killer from disposing of the clothes, not knowing that anyone saw him. Alternatively, maybe this witness testimony was filed incorrectly, which is why we've never heard of it until now. But one thing we already know for sure is something Richard Allen has said during his time in prison. He has admitted to the murders in multiple phone calls with both his wife and his mother. He has also confessed to his prison psychologist. Perhaps this uncomfortable truth is why the defense tried to argue that Odin worshippers forced him into making false confessions. However, they can no longer bring that up. And the prosecution argues that Allen described details to the psychologist that only the killer could know. Here, we hear reporter Bob Siegel from WTHR reporting on a day in court when Allen's phone calls are discussed.
The state called Brian Harshman to testify. He's a state police officer who has monitored all 700 plus Richard Allen jailhouse phone calls over the past 2 years. He and the prosecutor chose 7 of those calls to play for the jury. In one of them, Allen called his wife and said, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." His wife, Kathy, said, "No, you didn't." Richard said, "I did." She said, "No, you didn't." Richard, "Yes, I did."
So, the prosecutor has now played 7 recordings of conversations with Richard Allen, and in one of them, he outright confesses to his wife. However, it's important to mention that, according to the defense, Allen's confessions aren't because he's guilty. Instead, they argue, it's due to the fact that he has spent weeks, even months, in an isolated section of the prison, which has taken a toll on his mental well-being, causing it to deteriorate. Because of this, the defense believes none of Richard Allen's confessions should be taken at face value. Then there's the matter of the voice. Libby recorded the killer's voice in the Down the Hill clip. You remember, the image of the bridge guy, which turns out isn't a still photo, but actually a video clip where he's heard saying, "Down the hill." Bob Siegel from WTHR recounts the moment when a police officer, after listening to all the recordings, is asked if he recognizes the voice.
And when prosecutor Nick McLeland asked Harshman if he recognized the voice of the bridge guy on the now famous Down the Hill video that Libby German captured on her cell phone just before the murders, Harshman said he did. He looked right at the defendant and said, "It's the voice of Richard Allen."
Both of these things, Allen's confession and the voice recording, seem to be a big advantage for the prosecution. But who knows? Maybe the jury will agree with the defense that the confessions can't be taken seriously. On November 8th, 2024, the jury begins its deliberations. Now, everything is in their hands. They'll sit in seclusion for as long as it takes, discussing everything they've heard and seen in court, weighing all the evidence and testimonies against each other, and ultimately deciding if they believe Richard Allen is guilty or not. Bob Siegel from WTHR reports from outside the courthouse as the jury deliberates.
We're talking about 5 hours now that they have been weighing all of the testimony and evidence in this case, and they have a lot to consider after hearing from 64 different witnesses and seeing 387 different exhibits introduced by the state and the defense, all to help jurors decide if Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, the man Libby German recorded on her cell phone just before she and Abby Williams were murdered back in 2017.
It takes time to go through everything, and it will take even more time. But after more than 18 hours of deliberation, the court reconvenes on November 11th to hear the jury's decision.
Judge walked in. The judge gave the court the instructions that she would not tolerate any outbursts from either family side. And then the jury came walking in.
Richard Allen is charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of felony murder, murder committed during a kidnapping or unlawful detention. For a conviction, all 12 jurors must be convinced of his guilt. If even one hesitates or believes he's innocent, Richard Allen will walk free. Now, in a tense, expectant courtroom, Judge Francis Gull asks the jury to deliver their verdict. Just moments later, reporter Max Lewis from CBS rushes out to the cameras on the courthouse lawn.
So Max Lewis is going to join us. He was able to get a seat in that courtroom. Max, what do we know?
Okay, it is guilty. Guilty on count 1, count 2, count 3, and count 4.
The jury is unanimous, and they find Richard Allen guilty on all counts. Libby's grandmother Becky embraces Abby's mother as the verdict is read. They're not allowed to celebrate any further. The judge has ordered calm and order. On the other side of the courtroom, quiet sobs can be heard from Richard Allen's wife. In the U.S., the defendant receives their verdict during the trial. That's what happened to Richard Allen on November 11th. However, sentencing will take place at a later time. In this case, it won't be until December 20th. It's only then that we'll learn the sentence Richard Allen will receive. The maximum sentence is as much as 130 years in prison. In most cases, we would have more information at this point, after the verdict is delivered. Now, the trial is over, and everyone involved would, if they wish, have the opportunity to speak with the media and share if there's a particular testimony or piece of evidence that seemed to resonate more with the jury. But, and this will sound familiar, Judge Gull has decided that the gag order, the prohibition for anyone involved to speak with outsiders, will remain in place until December 20th.
Yeah, state police saying at this point they're not going to make any comment because Judge Gall has not lifted the gag order on this case. They said that they will be making statements next month after sentencing, but for right now, they don't have anything to say because that gag order is still in place.
As local WTHR's reporter explains, we'll simply have to wait until after December 20th before the police and others involved can comment. But out on the streets of Delphi, there is no gag order. And the people gathered on the lawn in front of the old courthouse, they're not keeping their opinions about the verdict a secret. Fox reporter Kit Hanley shares what she sees in Delphi.
There was a larger crowd there than usual. You can see around 50 people here anxiously awaiting the news of the verdict. Phones were out and recording, and signs were held up in the air. And as soon as it was announced, cheers, gasps, and clapping rang out.
Yes, for the vast majority of people on the streets of town, they can finally breathe a sigh of relief. For almost 8 years, they've wondered what happened to Libby and Abby on that warm February day in 2017. And now, it finally seems like they've gotten the answer everyone's been waiting for. However, it's worth mentioning that there are people in Delphi who don't believe Allen is guilty. And we'll see on December 20th whether Richard Allen and his defense choose to appeal the verdict. Most people expect that they will. But as things stand right now, the person responsible in this long, tragic, and unusual case has finally been convicted. Libby and Abby's families now have the chance to truly find closure. And maybe the town of Delphi can begin to heal. For almost 8 years, the people here have wondered if it was their neighbor, co-worker, or friend behind these horrific murders. Perhaps now they can let go of those suspicions, that fear, and start trusting each other again. Like so much else in this case, we'll have to wait and see. But we'll end, for now, with an optimistic Delphi resident who shares what he believes the future holds for the town after the verdict.
We want our town back. It took a piece of everybody. It took a piece that you couldn't say hi to one another no more. You couldn't thank somebody. You couldn't walk by and look at them without looking like you were doing something wrong. I feel the community is going to grow back together again. They're going to support one another in the loss. But the gain that we have is so tremendous. It outweighs what's going on. Without this verdict, we would have been lost still, and it would have been a heavy load a burden that we couldn't carry. We needed this. This is the day we were waiting.
You've listened to the fourth and final chapter, for now, of The Delphi Murders, narrated by me, Jonathan Rollins. The audio clips you've heard in this episode are from WTHR, Channel 13, Wish TV, Court TV, Carroll County, Indiana, WLFI TV, CBS, Merritt Street Media, Fox, NBC, WRTV Indianapolis, ABC, and Indiana State Police. This series is made in collaboration with Brian Whitney. Written and produced by Carl Hager. Sound design and mixing by Christopher Cronander. Executive producer is Tove Freeman Leffler. The program is produced by PodLit. If you like this series, don't forget to follow us, and you'll get updates as soon as we release a new episode of The Delphi Murders. Stay tuned, and thank you for listening.